are back. Welcome to Unleashed. We are so glad you're here. We are in 2025. I think this is the second podcast now of the. Or is it second or third of this month? I'm losing track of time. Eric, good to see you. It's been a while. I'm trying to think. It's been has it been like a month?
It's been a while, man.
Yeah, I know we each kind of gave each other Christmas presents. By the way, thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
that was nice. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's warm. Yeah,
yeah,
you can't see what we're talking about. He gave me a really nice, big, heavy flannel for Christmas. It was awesome.
little blue and orange, I believe.
It's cold out.
I know it, man. It's going to be colder tomorrow.
Yeah, when I just came from the doctor's office, and I think when I got in my truck, it was 18. I don't know what the wind chill is. It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's miserable out.
I wonder what next week we've got the inauguration. That's going to be going on this coming Monday, which is, what is that, the 20th?
20.
Yes, always the 20th. Yeah, that could be really cold.
Yeah. I hope there's no more issues leading up to it, man.
No kidding. It's just been crazy. Just especially the last year. I've never seen anything that's been as crazy as this last year. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. These fires in California. I mean, how many now? I think they said how many? That's 24 that they know have died, and there's about that many missing, I think. There's going to be those pockets, where it seems like, where is God in the middle of all this? Well, God owns it all. And, I just know right now that for me, I'm praying for these people that are out there, and I'm praying that they're going to see who God really is. And, maybe through this, some of the people that really don't believe in God, or they're living those crazy lifestyles, that maybe through the love of what they're seeing with the outpouring of people going, how can we help? And, and then the other thing too is with North Carolina and some of these other places, it just seems like they got forgotten about so quickly.
Yep.
It's like, what happened there? But we have a new administration getting ready to come in. My hope would be that somehow this country would get united again, because we need to be. And I think when we think about love and helping one another, if that can be that unifying factor, if that's that thing that ties us all together, then maybe it's a good thing sometimes. I don't want to say that like a fire or a hurricane or flood or these things are the things that will unite us. Like it's a good thing, but you can find good things in it. Let me say it that way. That's kind of where we're going today with this podcast, which is really interesting that this even just came up just now as we're kind of talking about this. We look at this country and it's been founded on Christian principles, and we've been strong and compassionate, and it just kind of seems like we've lost our strength, we've lost our compassion, we're doing so much fighting. But I really pray that God will unite us, through all this stuff. I got to speaking about like Sin City, I've got to fly to Vegas. I get to fly to Vegas. Let me rephrase that this week. I'll be out there, fly out next Sunday. Stacy and I are both going out. And we'll set up Monday for the SHOT Show, which is, military police, all the different guns and all kinds of really cool equipment, kind of like guy toys we love to play with out there. And, I'll be setting up during the inauguration, which is kind of a bummer. Last time when I was there, when Trump was taking office for the first time, they were playing it through the loudspeakers. I mean, the guys just erupted, which you can imagine that's that crowd. That were really supportive of that. But we'll be setting up, so I hope they at least have it through the inauguration or through the speakers. I love history. I love being able to, and if not, I'll get to see it probably back later in the hotel room or whatever. Last year we had, which was really interesting, because we get a lot of famous people to go through this show, and last year Donald Trump Jr. came in our booth. And, Stacy was like, she's like, you think he'll come through this year? I'm like, well, last year was easy because his dad wasn't the president, but this year it's the week of the inauguration. But, with Donald Trump Jr., he just might show up. He loves that kind of stuff. So anyhow, I'm looking forward to next week. But what I wanted to kind of talk about, which is interesting, I had to go to the doctor before I came to this podcast. I got in on an emergency visit, 2:45 in the afternoon, and we started recording like at 3:30. I mean, we were that fast getting from the doctor to here. But the reason I had to go was, we were talking about how cold it is now. Well, a week ago, we had a big snowstorm. There were some places that were getting a foot of snow. I think we had 6 inches up. We had up in Anderson, Indiana. But it was that wet stuff, that real heavy, heavy snow. And I went out and cleaned off 3 cars, and we have a long driveway, and I shoveled it. I don't have a snowblower, and, even Stacy, she's like, "Why don't you go buy a snowblower?" I'm like, "I'm not gonna go spend, like, $1,200 on a snowblower to shovel this thing." Well, being 64, I probably should have listened to what she was saying. Anyhow, I ended up hurting my back, which is weird because I exercise 6 days a week, but when you're doing that kinda stuff, you're not stretching. I did it, like, at 6:30 in the morning. Dumb me goes out there and does all this stuff, hurt my back. Well, I went to a chiropractor twice this week, trying to get it together because I flew out Thursday of this past week to go down to, flew into Tampa and spoke about an hour away for a men's retreat Friday and Saturday. And, we get down there and I'm thinking, hey, this is going to be awesome. Maybe it'll be like 75 degrees. I can take sandals and I get on my phone and look at the app, the temperature, and it's going to be like highs in the 50s, lows in the 40s at night. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is Florida. But it was crazy. I fly in and, we had was it the hurricanes? I think that was the big one back in October. I think it was October. And there's still trees down all over the place. And as we were driving out in the country to get to where this retreat's going to be, the further away you get from town, the less cleanup has happened. And to see these trees just uprooted and just like dominoes, just one on top of each other, and they're huge trees. The camp where I was speaking, I think they had to close it for a little while because if I remember right, they had like 60 trees that were taken out, during the storm. But pretty crazy. But I had hurt my back, and so I put it out on Facebook. I usually don't put stuff like this out, but I put it out on Facebook. Let me think. I flew out Thursday. Yeah, it was Thursday morning. And I said, hey, for like 4 days, I've been struggling with this. And this is what I should have said. I've been too prideful to ask for help, but I didn't. I just said, hey, I could use your prayers, blah, blah, blah. I know that in my weakness, God has made strong and all that. But it took me 4 days to ask anybody for help. That's pride, and a lack of humility. And I finally put it out there and I'm thinking, well, maybe I can get a couple people praying for me. I had about 300 people message me. No kidding. And just said, man, we really believe in what you're doing with reaching men, and the enemy's going to keep fighting you, and you're in our prayers. And I was getting it, private messages, text, Facebook, all this stuff. But I get down there, landed. There was a buddy of mine I went to college with, and Scott Keir, and we had a great time. I stayed at his place while I was down there, and it was awesome because he was also able to help me with some of the lifting and stuff that I was doing with, 50-pound luggage bags, which normally I wouldn't even think about it. But anyhow, so we drive. We get about an hour away. We go to where the event is going to be, and when we get there, there's not like a conference hall to do this in. There is an outdoor pavilion. It's cold out. It's getting dark. And as soon as we hit the lights to try to light the place up, the mosquitoes are everywhere. And so we're cooking the stuff out. We've got like a big screen television we're going to be running the computer through instead of it being like a video and sound system. But it was a small group of guys, but it still went awesome. But as we're sitting out there, in this cold, the mosquitoes, God has a way of keeping your attention. And I think it was the cold. Because the next day we moved it from the pavilion back to the cabin. They had like a screened-in porch. Everybody brought their chairs. We put the TV in there. But everybody stayed up till like 4 o'clock in the morning, goofing off and talking after the first night. I think that cold temperature was something that was really good for us because it really kept everybody kind of alert. But before we went there, here was a really cool thing. You always want to have relationship with the event sponsors and the guys as much as you can. And when you first get to an event, you don't know anybody yet. They all know each other. And we had a chance to go to lunch, and there was one of the guys. He's a really small stature guy, but the cool thing was he doesn't have a left arm, and he only has like part of a right arm. He was born this way. He's an amazing drummer. He's starting to play bass. He can do everything. And so here I am with my back, and I'm thinking, how am I going to make it through this weekend? And I'm watching him do everything, and he's only got like a part of one arm. And it was just one of those inspirations. Like, stop making excuses, Brent. You're going to trust God with what he said he was going to do this weekend. Everybody is praying for you. And so it was just kind of like, hike up your big boy pants, suck it up. Let's get this thing done. So we go to lunch that day. Amazing Italian food. I mean, the best bread I've ever had in my life. But it was really, really, really fun. So we get to the porch I was telling you about, and the first night's just kind of like I'm talking to the guys about, don't walk alone. Dangerous men don't walk alone. You need that brother, that iron sharpens iron, that guy that's going to be showing up for you. And that was the intro night. Just a lot of fun stories. But so we get to the next session of the day. We have 5 total sessions. So the first session on Saturday morning was about identity, and I told the guys, here's 3 words I want you to remember: identity, identity, identity. And so these guys were writing these things down because that's going to be the core of everything we're doing. And at the end of each session, I would have a list of questions that I would have the guys answer. We'd stop the session, and then we'd just sit and process before we'd take a break. And so session 1, I'm looking it up here on my computer. I asked the guys after that identity, I said, let me ask you guys a question. Where do you find yourself struggling most trying to prove that you have what it takes? Because I've talked about this before, a man's biggest question, in that moment when I'm called upon to come through, can I, will I, do I have what it takes? And so I asked the guys, I said, no, where do you find yourself struggling most, trying to prove that you have what it takes? And for me, like I just said a minute ago, like hike up your big boy pants. I think for me, it's that I think I have to tough it out. That's the masculine way of doing things. Doing it myself. That's self-sufficiency, and I think that's one of the areas that I probably do struggle the most. And then I asked the guys. I said, do you have a band of brothers that you walk with when things get tough? And I'm asking myself these questions now as I'm looking at this, and I do have a band of brothers, but I didn't reach out to them. I don't know why. Why again did I do that? I didn't get a hold of my buddies like, Roger, some of these guys you heard on the podcast before, Ken, and saying, hey, I'm really hurting here. I could use your prayers. And again, I think it comes back down to, I got this. And I think that's what many of us fall into, that trap. No matter what the struggle is, we think, what, I can do this. And that's exactly where the enemy wants us to be. Then I said, if you don't have a band of brothers to walk with, can you identify what it is that's keeping you from reaching out to these guys? And like I just said, I think for me, I think it was pride, to be honest with you. Yeah, I say I trust God, but sometimes it's in those moments when you can really see, well, that also means reaching out to others to pray for you, that God's going to be working through these prayers. And then the last one I asked, number 4, first session, I said, what actions can you take, to correct that you're not willing to reach out and do that? And I think the lesson that I learned this weekend, and I'll touch on it here in a second, is I had to humble myself and ask for help, because it's only when you finally like hit bottom, you have that pain going on, that you realize I can't do this on my own. And so we come back, asking then, is experiencing pain a good thing or a bad thing? And we'll get into that here in just a second. So when we were in these sessions, and I was moving into the next session, I was talking about these things that hold us back. And when I asked the question, the very first question I asked, there was this one guy, and he immediately began to share. I do struggle with that. Here's why I do with that. Sometimes it's my own arrogance. And he was very open. And in that moment, everybody else was being quiet at first. And all I did was look at him and say, you know what? I really appreciate your vulnerability, because that's what leaders do. And it's all it took. I mean, after that, every time I started asking questions, guys just started volunteering what they were going through. And it was pretty amazing, some of the answers we were going through this weekend. But, leading means to be vulnerable. It means opening up. It means sharing, our mistakes and our failures, not just like our wins and our accolades, right? That's real easy. And I confessed to the guys this weekend, I said, one of my biggest struggles is trying to one-up somebody, because I've got so many great stories. And if I'm feeling insecure, one of the areas that all of a sudden I have to be careful is name dropping or telling a story that was bigger than theirs. Just like the game dinner is what I'll speak at. Guy picks up his phone and he's going, hey, look at the size of this deer I shot. And the guy goes, yeah, let me show you my buddy's deer. Let me show you the deer I shot 3 years ago. Because we always feel like we have to one up somebody. Why is that? It's because we're buying into the big lie. And the big lie, again, we've talked about this before, says that my performance plus others' opinions equals my self-worth, which is an absolute lie from the pit of hell. So we keep moving through the sessions. It's awesome. guys are opening up a can of worms, on every single session, and you can begin to feel the emotions in the room. The guys are getting a little bit choked up. The guys are hugging on breaks, and they're walking out into the grass, and they're talking to each other. They're talking about their struggles, whether it's marriage or pornography or money, job, whatever the thing is that's going on. And when I got back to the very end of the last session, I was going to be doing it on purpose. And when I say on purpose, the subject was going to be purpose. And I know we had Kevin Huff on here. This is a new book that we're working on together called Unleashed. And we'll keep you posted on when that's going to be coming out. But so I was talking about purpose. And I said, one of the things that the enemy is going to do is he is going to try and submerge you. And what I mean is he's going to try to literally almost drown you in other things so you can't stay focused on whatever that purpose is. And I told a story that I told on here. I think it was in 2022. It was shortly after we formed this podcast. I'll bet it was in the first 5 weeks. And I kind of want to just brush on that story a little bit because I want to take us somewhere with that. I was on a fishing trip with my son in northwestern Pennsylvania on this place called Elk Creek, crystal clear water, great trout and steelhead stream. My son, I think, was 8 at the time. And long story short, it had been torrential rains there. And there was 2 streams that came together where there was a whirlpool, and I ended up getting, I fell in the water because we were literally stranded in the middle of the stream and trying to find a way out. I left him on this little sandbar kind of a thing, and as I was trying to get around on that whirlpool, I slipped, fell in the water, got sucked in, and it was about maybe 14 feet deep, they said later that day. And the only thing that saved me was my son watching me disappear under this whirlpool, this swirling water. The only thing that saved me was whatever it was at the bottom. I don't know whether it was a log or whether it was a rock. I hit bottom, and I'm able to push off and get my face above water. And so, long story short, there was 3 guys that ended up rescuing us. If you heard the podcast, you know the story where there was a game warden, fish commissioner, and his 2 boys, heard our cries for help, and they came, got us out of there. And my son in the back of the truck, he's thanking God. He starts praying, God, thank you for rescuing us from that watery grave. And then he says, thank you for sending those 3 guardian angels. And then he calls them the Navy SEALs of the universe. And if you've heard that podcast, you've read, maybe I think it was Into the Wilds. I shared that story in my book, Into the Wilds, which you can find on Amazon or wherever. It was a really powerful moment because the way that my son was seeing these angels that God has are pretty amazing. So years later, I'm back. I'm working on that book, Into the Wilds. And the man who was mentoring me, I'm showing him that story. And I said, hey, what do you think of this story? I'm going to put it in the book. And he says, well, I think you missed the point of the story. I said, how so? He says, well, you said it was like these guardian angels, these Navy SEALs of the universe. He goes, that's a cute line. It's neat. But I think you missed the point of the story. I said, well, what is it? He says, well, was it a good thing or a bad thing you hit the bottom of that whirlpool, that hole? And I said, it was terrible. Didn't you hear the story? He goes, yeah, but you said this was like 14 feet, right? I said, yeah. He said, what would have happened had you only been sucked down to like 6 feet or even 2 feet in the whirlpool? I said, I'd have drowned because I wouldn't have been able to get out. I had to hit bottom in order to be able to get out of there. And then he says, well, then let me ask you again. Was it a good thing or a bad thing you hit bottom? So I'm sharing that story with the guys. Now, I had received a text from a dear friend on the way, on the plane as I'm on the tarmac, getting ready to take off. And he was telling me about his son and that there was a loss of communication between the 2 of them, and it's breaking his heart. And if you've ever had someone in your life where whether you caused it, whether they caused it, whether you don't know what happened, but you have that break in the relationship where there's no communication, it's hard. It's very, very difficult. And I know, even with my own son, he's had to go through a lot of his own stuff too, like we all did. And there has been a time where, he was going through some really, really difficult stuff. And some things where we weren't necessarily seeing eye to eye on something. And there's a break in the relationship. It's hard. I knew exactly what this guy was talking about because I've experienced that too. And it's difficult. It's one thing if it's not somebody that's that close to you, but when it's somebody, especially a family member, where that break in the relationship happens and you love them more than anything in the world, you understand that you can't force that conversation. You can't force that relationship to happen because you're going to push them even further away, especially if they don't feel safe. And so, like we talk about boundaries. When someone sets a boundary, you can't set a boundary around someone else. Boundaries are for yourself. You set them to protect yourself. Well, when I went to the doctor today about my back, I had injured my back and I just came from the doctor. I was telling you that. He said what happened was the muscles around my spinal column. He says, I don't think this is a disc. He says, those muscles that you have, he says, you severely strained it. You begin to tear the muscle around one of the vertebrae in my low back. He said, but that pain that you're feeling, what happens is that muscle tightens up around that muscle like a vice. He said, this is God's way of protecting it because whenever you move the wrong way, now you feel it, don't you? And I'm like, yeah, I really do. He said, that muscle wrapping around and not allowing you to move it in that direction brings healing. It's God's way of bringing healing because now you're not going to strain it anymore. And I know so many of us, if you've been through the pain of a broken relationship, you want to force it to get back together, right? It can be with your spouse, it can be with your kids, it can be with your friends, coworkers, whatever. But the temptation is to want to push it and force it. And the thing is, if the other person isn't ready for that, you can do more damage. The doctor, when I left, because I work out 6 days a week, it's now been 1 week since I've worked out, which is really hard for me. And he said, don't work out. And I kind of laughed and I said, my body's already telling me I can't. He says, yeah, that's the body's way of protecting itself. So I just, we were talking about this whole thing. And as I was telling them the story about my son watching me in the hole, it's difficult sometimes when you have to watch somebody else, whatever they're going through, have to go through it. And if it's hitting bottom, then it's hitting bottom. But through the whole thing, what happens is you begin to see things differently. You begin to learn to see that God has a way of rescuing us sometimes, maybe in a way that we wouldn't choose it. But when we look back, we go, oh, that's the only way that being rescued would have happened. He not only allowed me to hit bottom and have that log or rock or whatever it was there, but he had 3 men that were ready to come down and get us out of there. So, Stacy's messaging me this week and, how's it going, all this stuff? And I said, well, it's really cold and my back's really hurt. She knew my back was hurting. I haven't flinched yet on this video, which is really funny because probably as soon as I go to stand up, you'd be cracking up if you'd see me try to stand up. But she gets a hold of me. I'm sitting at the airport in Tampa yesterday. Chick-fil-A was closed, bummer. It was a Sunday. So I think I was getting Starbucks sandwich or something. And she was really disappointed. And I said, what's going on? She says, I just don't understand. She goes, you put it out for prayer. And she goes, you had like 300 people. And then she posted, it had just tons praying for you. And she said, why didn't God heal you? Now, if you remember the story with my wife, she grew up with never knowing who her father was, abandoned at the age of 8, raised by her grandparents. So trust for her is a very difficult thing. And she knows my faith is off the charts. I trust God. I do. With most things. I just told you a minute ago about how I can be pretty independent when it comes to doing some things where I do need to ask for help. But she says, why didn't God heal you? And I came back and I said, I think many of us look at healing as like, well, there's that pain in my back. God, why didn't you take it away before I got to the event so that I didn't have that pain anymore? And I said, as I've been thinking about it, had I been able to just suck it up or God would have healed me like that, I wouldn't have been dependent upon him. I really, this weekend, probably was depending upon his strength more than I ever have because the pain was really bad. And the other thing it did was it created humility because I couldn't fix it. My buddy Scott, I would say, Scott, I'm going to need your help, lifting this heavy suitcase with all these books and everything up here and over here and carrying things up to the cabin and all these. It created humility. When the guys were all out, throwing a ball around and doing stuff, I was sitting in the cabin because I couldn't do it. Well, it kept me from trying to pose, right? Trying to get out there and try to outdo somebody else or prove at 64 I can still do what those guys are doing at 30 or whatever. It created humility within me. And that's the first thing I said when I came back to Stacy. I said, the healing of the back, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But there's areas in my life, just like when I was sucked down in the bottom of the whirlpool, that God had to go deeper with me and show me there's some areas that I needed to be able to let go. On the way down there with my back hurting, I was sitting at the Chick-fil-A at the Indianapolis airport on Thursday. And an old man came over and he sat. And when I say old, he was over 80. And he sat down beside me on this bench. And he was there maybe 5 minutes. And when he went to get up, it was all he could do. His legs were shaking. You could tell his back was really hurting. His knees were really hurting. But when I got done with this weekend and I got back to the airport, I looked at that bench. I looked at it differently. I had empathy for what this man must have been going through and what he had gone through to get to that point in his life. I was at the chiropractor last week before I took off, and there was a man who came in, and they had him on the table next to me. They're doing like that tinging or whatever on your back. He came in, and the man smelled. Really bad. Smelled like weed, really, really bad. And he was moaning and groaning, and I'm like, guy, just suck it up. Well, now I know. Now I understand. There's sometimes when that kind of pain hits you, you can't help but do that. And so you begin to look at things through a little different lens. So I kind of want to bring this back around to, was it a good thing or a bad thing that I hurt my back this week? Well, it still stinks. I'm going to Vegas this weekend, like I said, and I'm really praying that it's healed up even more before that. But if not, I trust God that whatever it is, He's going to show me how I can learn to trust Him more, to see Him more in those areas where I'm literally drowning and God says, I can pull you out, but I need you to hit bottom first. Wow. I ended last week's podcast with a verse, and I want to bring it back to that this time. And here, listen to this verse. And it's Paul talking here. Paul's been through everything. And he says, because of the extravagance of those revelations, and so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in touch with my limitations. He goes on, he says, Satan's angel did his best to get me down, but what he did, in fact, was push me to my knees. And then he goes on and he says, no danger then of walking around high and mighty. He says, at first I didn't think of it as a gift, and I begged God to remove it. He says, 3 times I did that. And then he told me, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness. Paul says, once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. He says, now I take limitations in stride and with good cheer. These limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks. And then he ends up with, so he says, I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. It really is a case of Christ's strength moving in on our weakness. I often say, does God, want us broken? He does. But here's the thing. He doesn't want us to stay broken. He wants us healed. Sometimes healing begins in unexpected ways. And that's where trust comes in. Because ultimately, trusting God, it's the beginning of healing. Because it causes us to go to the only one who can heal us. Let me say that again. Sometimes the healing begins in unexpected ways, and that's where trust comes in. Because ultimately, trusting God is the beginning of healing because it causes us to go to the only one who can heal us. So was it a good thing or a bad thing that I was able to learn to trust God for His strength and humility this weekend? In the end, lives were changed, and I was one of them. Father God, thank you. Thank you for those challenges that we have because there's a gift in all of them. Help us to learn to be able to see that. For those out there struggling with relationships, marriages, children, whatever it is going on right now, Father, that you will do your work completely. Not just the surface things that we can see taken care of or healed, but that you will heal us from the inside out, where we learn to know you more and more with every single day. Father, we are so in love with you. Be with us now. Guide and direct us, God. I would just ask and help us to see the challenges really are gifts and that you are in them. We'll see you next time.